kings and queens and everything in between. Welcome back to another episode of the Peasant Party Podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Warren, and I actually just want to turn it right over to my guest. We have like a lot of questions today that I'm so excited to have you help me answer. Shelly, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. My name's Shelly. I am in a master's program studying mental health counseling, so working towards becoming a licensed therapist. But yeah, kind of my specialty and my interest or passion is around sex and intimacy and relationships. So yeah, right now I'm actually working at a sex and relationship therapy practice here in Austin. So I get to work mostly with individuals, some couples, and a group as well, kind of co-facilitating a group. Mostly talking again about relationships and intimacy. But my podcast is called Situationship to Soulmate. And yeah, I started it last year. I do have like over 10 episodes out now. And it really is just kind of focused on, I guess, this experience that I feel like I had in my 20s, which was just like having a lot of situationships or just dating experiences that like didn't really feel fulfilling to me or wasn't really what I was looking for. So I have episodes around kind of just a lot of different dating topics. I've had a few different guests as well. I had my friends come on who are they're both non-binary and they are in a poly relationship, so kind of got to talk about that, which was interesting. I had a friend come on. We talked about she's also sober, so we talked about like alcohol and dating or sobriety and dating. But other than that, most of my episodes are just me talking about different topics like boundaries, communication, how to get over a situationship if you've gone through one, things like that. So yeah, I think you can find them on all the main, or you can find the podcast on all the main, awesome. Apple and Spotify and wherever else people find them.
Nice.
Google, whatever. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Well, everyone check it out.
Yeah, I guess we kind of met on TikTok, which is, I always love meeting new friends on TikTok. I kind of started making like sex ed, sexual assault awareness, consent, that kind of content, I guess, on TikTok a few years ago now. It's gone by fast, actually, but
I think I've followed you for a minute now.
Yeah.
And I think I'm trying to remember what it was that I saw of your content that, but it was something related to, like definitely like sexual assault awareness, or just based on like sex ed, human sexuality, communication around, sexuality, what you're comfortable with, consent, things that I think are all very, very important. I think something else I saw that I think is kind of a niche that like comes up a little bit like anecdotally is just I love hearing people talk about their sobriety and the relationship with alcohol, so that's something I've really enjoyed of your content.
Thank you.
And then of course recently, and I think this is more of a fun one, you recently attended the Grammys.
I did. Yeah. It's kind of a random fun fact. It was literally like last Sunday. My boyfriend, he is a jazz musician and he's also kind of a music historian, I guess he would call it. So he studies a lot of like the history of jazz. He's very into the 1920s, like what they call traditional jazz. He actually worked on a project that was nominated for a Grammy, which is like crazy. But so we actually got to go to the Grammys in person and it was super fun. It was very kind of surreal to like be there in person and got to like walk down the red carpet and, sat and watched the whole Grammys ceremony and didn't really get to like interact or talk to any of the celebrities, but definitely it was cool to like see them in person and be like, oh, I'm in the same room as them.
Yeah.
And then just, all the like musical performances were really fun to see. It was like almost like a mini like concert too, because you're like, oh, I get to see all. But
well, you both looked fantastic, and that must be an extraordinary honor. That's like an athlete going to the Olympics, like a musician going to the Grammys. That's like all you could ever want, I feel like.
That's true. Yeah.
It
was awesome.
And so that was fun to see. And then I feel like you get a lot of your content comes through questions through the comment section around people and their sexuality, and I feel like you do such a good job of just answering some really, really challenging questions, in my opinion, that I think a lot of people might look at and say like, oh, I can't answer that, or I'm not comfortable answering that on the internet. And that's something I think you do it very well. You do it very thoughtfully.
Thank you.
You are very honest about like your experience and what you do and don't know. And I think it's really, really valuable and helpful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I definitely I don't know when or why this started, but I feel like I've just always been someone who doesn't really shy away from certain topics, or I just have always been very fascinated by like, yeah, relationships and sex and that kind of thing. So just even like in my friend groups and stuff, I was always the person that was like asking people, you know, personal questions about themselves, or just wanting to go like deeper than just surface level. Maybe it's ADHD too. I know you mentioned you also have ADHD, but I feel like we kind of like to skip the small talk and just be like, I want to talk about the deeper things. But yeah, I think with TikTok, I definitely noticed pretty quickly when I started posting on there that people were really, responding to some of the like more taboo or like, like you said, like just things that are more difficult to talk about or that just aren't talked about as much. So I was like, okay, kind of like I just said, like, I don't mind talking about it. So I guess I'll do it and see. But like you said, like still being aware of like, okay, I'm not an expert in certain, you know, I'm not a OBGYN or you know, sometimes people will ask me questions that are very like, I'm like, well, I'm not a doctor, but I will give you my perspective as someone who has just done a lot of my own research around it. And
totally.
Stuff, but
totally. And and I feel like people are pretty receptive to it. I mean, obviously TikTok has some crazy commenters here and there. And, you know, I think anytime, I hate it, but just like kind of the sort of like red pill manosphere space that's like made its way onto TikTok that has a lot to say anytime a woman's talking about sexuality or answering sexual questions. And I mean, I think that's so frustrating. And I think just people who listen to what they think are dating podcasts. I know there's people that have come to my podcast who are younger who think dating podcasts, they think of the people yelling and screaming at each other. Like I feel like that type of knowledge is there with like with the younger audience. And I think what you're doing is awesome and like a very strong counter to that because there's a very, I feel like, toxic message out there on TikTok and kind of those like alternative media type things.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, definitely will stumble across videos on TikTok sometimes where I'm like, oh, that is just not good advice. I mean, I think you do a great job of that, of just being very direct and blunt with like, if you don't agree with something someone's saying, being like, no, actually that is kind of bad advice, which is, I think TikTok needs more of that sometimes because it's like, it's easy for like the majority of, or for it to feel like, oh, the majority of people have this one opinion or this one thought process. So I think like people like me and you where we're like, okay, we're gonna kind of challenge that a little bit or say our own opinion. And you're right, sometimes becomes a sexist kind of thing in a way.
Sure.
But
gender debates where they weren't supposed to be there in the first place. Like I think there's people like things like consent, sexual, like that shouldn't be a who has life or dating harder conversation. I really, that's something I really try to like push back against. And I feel like I'm thinking of like recent topics that have come up with yours that have really kind of caught my eye, and they're really relevant to the questions I've been asked. I feel like a big theme with the questions that I have for you today is just what is okay to sexualize? What if someone is attracted to something that you don't find sexual about yourself? When is sexualizing, a good thing and a way to build intimacy and versus, when is it not okay? I feel like is the name of the game of the questions. I think someone asked you about having, fantasies related to like sexual fantasies, intimacy fantasies related to being assaulted, possibly being like a trauma response or something like that. Like, I thought it was like a really, really insightful response. Do you want to like share that here? Because I think it would be really valuable to our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I saw that comment and I was like, okay, I feel like it was like kind of brave for that person to comment that because I think there's a lot of ways that people could have, or I mean, I even did see some comments where people were being kind of judgmental or being like, oh, I can't believe you would say that. But yeah, like you said, someone had just asked, like, is there something wrong with me? Basically, if I feel like I have a fantasy or I have a desire to be sexually assaulted. And yeah, I just thought it was really interesting because, it's like something we don't talk about a lot. But yeah, my main response was kind of just that, yes, a lot of times it could be a trauma response. It could be if someone has already experienced sexual assault, maybe if it was in childhood and they might not even quite remember it or really know what happened, then maybe as they get older, they might feel like they have kind of a fantasy around it. And then I think someone actually commented on the video, something that I hadn't really thought of, but I think it's true, which is that porn can sometimes like affect that as well. So I think, you know, if someone has been watching porn from a young age, they may have seen, you know, obviously a lot of porn is not necessarily focused on consent or things like that. So I think there are a lot of people out there who kind of got a lot of their sex ed or their just awareness of sex from porn. So if they're watching videos or watching porn where it's like, yeah, someone's not asking for consent, or sometimes it does, you know, even depict like really kind of violent things, like that might register in their head as like, oh, this is something that is supposed to turn me on, or maybe it does turn them on. And then, yeah, I guess my like overall kind of point with that video too was just to kind of remind people, like, I think we might get into this more later, but I think people feel very scared around like if they have a fantasy of something that seems like wrong or seems taboo. And I think like a lot of times fantasies can be, you can think of them as like there's some message or some kind of theme that you're like, that you find appealing or that you're attracted to that might not be as like straightforward as it seems. I don't know if that makes, I almost think of it like dreams, you know, like people will try to like analyze the dream that they had. And a lot of times I've heard people say like, you know, in dreams you might be dreaming about a specific person, but they are representing a different person or something. So I think,
still getting the dream where you miss your college final or something is like a sign that you're stressed in general or something, versus you're not actually in college anymore kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think like with sexual fantasies, it can be similar where it's like, it's not always a literal interpretation. So you could maybe, I think I said in that video too, like you could think about maybe you have a fantasy around being more submissive and wanting someone to be more dominant. And that can definitely be played out in consensual ways. Or I think I also get the example of like, obviously a lot of people want to feel very desired or very like sexualized in a consensual way. And so maybe for some reason you're interpreting that as wanting to be like sexually assaulted or taken advantage of, but really it's more just like wanting to feel very desired. I don't know. I feel like that was a long answer, but yeah, no, I always appreciate when I get comments like that are like,
the hard
they kind of challenge you a little bit. Yeah,
totally. And this might be more of like too much of a history question, but have fantasies like that always existed, or like sort of you know, sexual situations like that always existed, or do you think that's something new that's come with, you know, the evolution of things like porn and whatnot? Like because I feel like it's like the Kama Sutra is a very old book from what I know and things like that. So it's like, have these things always existed and now we're just talking about it, or does it seem like it's this new thing that's kind of evolved with new technology and kind of you know, more people talking about human sexuality?
That's a good question. That like makes me want to research it more. My thought process, I don't know for sure, but I would think that that it probably is that these kind of fantasies have probably been around for a long time, and that just now in our society where it's a little bit more normal to talk about it. I kind of think of like when people say like, yeah, everyone has ADHD now, or oh, suddenly everyone's gay, or everyone, like, it's like, well, no, that's not, it really is more that people are just talking about it more now, or people are more aware of it now. So yeah, I would think that would be the case with fantasy type of or kinks or things like that, where it's like, yeah, like you said, like in history, it might not have been as normal to talk about it. But I mean, on the other hand, I do think that technology and, you know, dating apps and porn and, you know, the accessibility of like seeing certain things, that I'm sure that has also affected people's fantasies too, just because it's like, yeah, like I definitely know that porn and I don't know, Instagram models and different things even has been shown scientifically to like affect your brain or the way that you think about certain things, which is interesting. I don't know too much about it, but yeah, that'd be my guess.
Cool.
It is interesting though. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I don't know why I said cool there. That was my like very much my active listening saying cool for something that maybe you shouldn't have. But no, and yeah, like I feel like you see, if you go and look at like hieroglyphics, there's some horny hieroglyphics out there where it's like, you know, this kind of stuff maybe always existed in some ways.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like, you know, people like nowadays it's like, oh, the person that ghosted you or something like that. And I still think like, back in the day, it was the horse and buggy just couldn't make it on time. Like you were still seeing that. Like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like the overall themes or kind of
Totally.
experiences are probably similar, just different details maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the mailbag question. We're going in the mailbag, everyone. Okay, mailbag. How to communicate that I don't like it rough. Okay. This might be a dumb question, but it's something that has me pretty anxious as I get back to trying to date. When it comes to me and my sexuality, I'm someone who does not like it rough due to some past trauma. But the stuff that a lot of guys bring up when we start having those conversations tends to include that in a way that feels really nonchalant. Hair pulling, slapping, dirty talk. I know this is generally more normal, and these guys are probably trying to set the mood and mean well, but how do I communicate this in a way that doesn't seem defensive or like I'm blaming them? I also feel like it forces me to talk about some darker stuff from my teenage years that I'm not quite ready to talk about yet. How do I approach these conversations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like my first response to that was that it seems like a lot of times male pleasure, or kind of if it's a more of a heterosexual like dating or a sexual experience, a lot of women do feel like they kind of revert to whatever he is interested in or whatever he's wanting, or like the man tends to be the one to bring up things that he's interested in first sometimes, which I think is interesting. So I think I don't know, that just kind of like stood out to me that she was saying like, oh, he's brought up you know, hair pulling or things that he might be interested in. It sounds like she is kind of wondering like how to respond to that. So I guess my first thing would be like curious, or maybe being curious for yourself, like, oh, is there a reason why I haven't tried to communicate things that I'm interested in, or if and then I think as far as responding to that, like, I mean, I think that as long as, I know she said like not seem defensive or not, I think this is kind of like a therapy speak thing, but like using I statements or like focusing on yourself, like, oh, I really get turned on by this, or like I really enjoy these kind of things, and maybe giving him some ideas of what would turn you on or what you would like, instead of saying like, oh, I don't want to do what you brought up.
Or assuming intent, like you want this or something, like it feels like you want this, like, hey, I'm not comfortable with X, like, yeah.
And I think, the other thing is like, I feel like a lot of times like he might be bringing up those things because maybe he either dated someone in the past who was into that, or he has been told by a friend or someone like, oh, this is what women like. So I think there is a way to just nicely be like, oh, that's actually not really my thing. And then he'll be like, oh, that's good that you told me, because I was just assuming that you would like that based on, again, like past partners, or just what he's heard about what women find attractive. And obviously it's like different for each person.
Totally. And I feel like there is like that awkward song and dance where people probably like do mean well, but it's like the miscommunications around, who talk. There's, something to be said for like, who talks first, or who, like when you think of like a negotiation and a sales process, like whoever like no one wants to be the first person that talks first, because that kind of sets the tone. But like, like I think people are sometimes averse where it's like, how are things going to go if I am the one who talks first? And sometimes people like say the wrong thing.
That's true.
And I feel like the right guy, with like, if he said, whoa, wait a second, like I'm more of this, I'm more like this type of experience, like they'd be receptive, and maybe it's just like, this is what's worked in the past. Like I feel like men are very like, this is what worked in the past, okay, this is what'll work next time, and sometimes it doesn't. Like no one's a monolith. It's like, how do you have those conversations where it's like, not, this isn't really for me. Like, do you have to say like, do you have to tell the story why, or how do you open that door? Like I don't think she owes anyone an explanation. I think she can just say like, I like it sweet, I like it sensual, but maybe someone that's afraid to like about talking about those things too early, because it brings out darker experiences. Like what would you recommend?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said about like, I really don't think anyone owes someone an explanation. And I think even in the way that she wrote it, of like, oh, I know that what he's saying is totally normal, or like, I think that there might be some kind of shame in there, or embarrassment around like, maybe, I feel like there's a lot of rhetoric of like, oh, you like it more vanilla or more basic or whatever, and like that being negative. But there really isn't anything wrong with like, if someone wants sex or intimacy that's like, you know, like there's nothing wrong with like how anyone wants it really. But so I think that would be one thing I would say would be like, I think when you are telling him what you want or what you don't need to come from a place of like apologizing or being like, oh, like, I know it's normal, but like, I just don't like this. And then, like going farther to explain why like things from your past have maybe caused you to not like that. I do think that, well, yeah, I think it also depends on the type of relationship. I think if you're in a very serious relationship or you've been together for a little bit longer and you really feel like you see this person as like someone you think will be a long-term partner, then I do like encourage people to talk about their past or talk about like trauma or sexual assault or anything that they've been through, just because I feel like it actually does like help you to feel less shame around it. But yeah, I would say if this is someone you're like newer dating, you really don't owe them, or you don't need to feel obligated to like share your trauma until you're ready, definitely, or until you feel, I would say like you need to really feel safe and comfortable with the person and feel like you can trust them. Like, okay, if I tell them this, I know they're gonna be supportive of me, and it's not going to kind of lead to like any like negative mental health consequences for you if you are to reveal this. But
Totally.
yeah,
That makes sense. What is okay to, what's sexual, what isn't, what's okay to sexualize? The mailbag is dates and matches sexualizing my career. Heterosexual male who's also a high school vice principal writing in. Something awkward I run into dating is the number of women who want to use my career as role play in the bedroom. I've had some experiences where they start calling me by Mr. Last Name in the bedroom, saying the bed is the principal's office or that we're in detention. You get it. I get what they're trying to do, but this type of thing makes me feel super uncomfortable and predatory. I'm the one who has to go into work, into that career the next day. When this has happened, usually it's in the moment. In past conversations where it's come up, the women have felt rejected or took it personally. It really isn't, but it makes me less interested, fearing this experience will happen again. Do you have a good script for saying I'm not interested in this type of fantasy without hurting feelings?
yeah, that's a good one. I think one thing is it sounded like he said that sometimes these conversations kind of come up in the moment, or I think what a lot of people recommend is to not talk about it when you're actually in the bedroom. So like finding a more neutral time, maybe if you're hanging out later, or you're, to bring it up and talk about like, I think that it does tend to feel more rejecting or more just lead to more like misunderstandings, even if you're trying to like in the moment be like, hey, I'm not really into this fantasy. Like, obviously, as far as like consent, or like if you need to like stop it in the moment, if they're saying something that's really throwing you off in the moment, you can say something. But I would say like, as far as like having the bigger conversation around it, just trying to find a time that's like, more, I don't know why neutral is the word I'm thinking, but like, a time that you're not already like kind of in the midst of something sexual. And then, but as far as like his overall question, I feel like, none of us can really choose like if something makes us uncomfortable. So I feel like if it really does make him uncomfortable, I mean, again, it kind of goes back to what we talked about before of like, I kind of feel like a lot of these women might be assuming that this is something that he would find sexy. Maybe
they think it's adventurous. They think it's fun.
Yeah. So like even just letting them know like, just I guess always like trying to be kind about it, but just being like, oh, I totally get why you like wanted to play around with that, or like, but for me, it just makes me feel uncomfortable, or like that's not really what turns me on, but maybe we could try something else, or like, I guess I would also recommend like if like thinking about like what exactly about it makes him uncomfortable, which I mean, I think he kind of answered that, but like maybe there's a way to be like, oh, maybe we could try a different type of role play that's not related to my career, but is still has similar themes or something, like maybe he would be into a role play where he's in some position of power or something, but it's not like the,
Yeah.
teacher or principal type of thing. Maybe it's like a different scenario. I don't know. Because it sounds like he's kind of just getting stuck in feeling like it's too close to home almost or something.
I can
like,
see that because I've seen like, and I think like not even like porn, but like just the TV and movies kind of play into this. Like how many movies are there where it's like someone goes on a date with a doctor and then they end up in a dentist chair or something like that? Like maybe they think they're being adventurous. Like I feel like also like depending on what kind of circles you run into, like people don't run into like principals a lot, so maybe it's like they're kind of impressed. Like I feel like there is that fantasy there, but I've definitely like heard of people like specifically like friends who are nurses where they're just like, and it's more from a place of like, oh my gosh, I want to go home from work. I'm sick of the like, you know, kind of like nurse talk where it's where they feel like their job is sexualized, or ooh, like, you know, it comes up really quick on the dating apps like, ooh, like nurses, I've heard things about nurses, where it's like your job gets sexualized and maybe it's something you want to leave at work. There's also, I mean, people who lean into it. Like I think there's you know, I've known people where it's like they're dating a doctor and they're, you know, they're more than happy to bring out the lab coat. Like I don't know, it really varies person to person.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a good point about like for some people they might have a disconnect between like their career and work and then like something sexual. Like they kind of are like, okay, I go to work every day. I don't want to be like thinking about work when I'm in the bedroom or something. But yeah, like you said, for other people, they might be like, no, it's fun, something adventurous, something new to try. So yeah, I guess the last thing I would say too is like, when you try to bring up the conversation, maybe asking the person like, oh, what was it about that was interesting to you? Or like what, you know, like asking her, oh, what made you kind of want to do that role play or to call me, professor or whatever, you know.
You can find an alternative that still works with that. Like if you know the root, like it's like, oh, like, you know, I want something with empower, because I like I'll speak from experience. Yeah, we're far enough into the episode where it's not early on, but like my significant other like works in schools, and I think we definitely had a conversation of like nothing where that involves, you know, pretending to be someone that would be like technically a child or a minor, like you know, no that kind of thing. And it's like I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, you know, you know, saying like, you know, that kind of thing. That's weird, makes me uncomfortable, and it actually made me like respect him a lot. Like where it's just like, okay, cool, like, you know, takes their job seriously. So I think like anyone would, and I think it really kind of varies.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I think there was kind of an element of that in that question of like feeling like uncomfortable, that it was almost a theme of like maybe a child or a teenager or something, like that reminding him of that. I can understand why that would be, you know. But yeah, like you said, maybe it could be like, oh, pretending you're both teachers, or you're or like
I don't know, like you got arrested and you're both adults, you got arrested, one's a cop, one's in prison. I don't know. I guess like and this wasn't part of the questions, but I think it just like popped in my head, but like fantasies where someone does want to like, you know, maybe you don't have a very big age gap between the two of you, but, you know, someone wants to pretend they're a lot younger. Like, is that like a fantasy that's like relatively normal or common? Like,
yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think I forgot to say in the beginning, I went through like a sex and relationship coach training program, and I remember them talking about this, or like a few different fantasies where they said, yeah, it actually is pretty common for people to have fantasies around someone being younger, or them being the younger one with an older person. And yeah, kind of like we talked about earlier, like that doesn't necessarily correlate to like, oh, in real life they're actually going to be predatory or something, or they're actually going to want to do that in real life. It could have more to do with, I don't know, maybe the like feeling innocent, or feeling or maybe there was something that they went through when they were a teenager or younger that like it can almost, for some people it can kind of be like a healing process actually, to like kind of do some fantasies or role plays around something that I don't know, it like that they would never want to do in real life necessarily, but that it just like there's something about that that's appealing to them, I guess. So anyway, so yeah, I would say that it is pretty common for people to have those kind of fantasies. And yeah, like I think there is a big difference. I think I said this in that video that we talked about earlier of like there's a difference between like having a fantasy around something versus like, again, like in real life I actually feel like I'm going to, you know, do something illegal or do something that's not ethical or hurt someone or like the example of the TikTok video I made, like someone can maybe feel like they have a fantasy around sexual assault, but that doesn't mean that like, oh, I actually genuinely want someone to rape me or something. Like, totally. I don't know. It is complicated though, but yeah, I think like those kind of fantasies are probably more common than people realize. And yeah, in that training that I did, they kind of talked about how like, yeah, there are like safe and consensual ways to kind of play around with some of the fantasies that you have. They can actually make someone feel like, oh, I'm able to experience this in this safe container without like I said, doing something in the real world that would hurt myself or someone else, or
totally. And another kind of off the books question that also pops in my head. I feel like when people are kind of, they maybe discover they have this fantasy, this interest or something like that, when they want to seek out resources, maybe they're scared to talk about other people. But if you go on the internet and you start searching for information about that, a lot of websites pop up that maybe are showing you, some like porn videos, or they're maybe like kink sites and stuff like that. Are there known like kind of safe spaces for people to research their own fantasies in a way that's like comfortable? Like, are there like websites? What are your recommendations for where to go if you feel something that you don't quite understand and you want to learn more about it in a safe place? Like, what do you recommend, or what resources do you know of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I'm blanking on like websites or resources, but I guess I would say if they are able, financially or like at an age where they're able to seek out therapy, there are a lot of therapists or counselors or people that kind of do specialize in sexuality or in working with sexual assault survivors, or working with people that are having any sort of kind of issues or difficulties, or they think of them as issues around their sexuality. So I would say like, kind of trying to search and see if you can find any a counselor or a therapist to work with. I think that like in my work so far, I've seen like people they'll open up about something that they feel very ashamed of, or very like, oh, this is probably like so weird or so like horrible of me, and then like most of the time I think mental health professionals are like, oh, I've heard something similar before, or like they are kind of will be able to kind of validate them, hopefully. But yeah, that's a good question as far as like websites and like resources like that, because you're right. I think part of what can be upsetting for people is like if they are having these thoughts or these feelings and then they don't feel like there's any outlet for them, or they don't feel like they have anyone to talk to about it, or anyone that would understand them. So yeah, again, I think that's why like obviously I think everyone should work with a therapist, but I know it's not accessible to everyone. But yeah, if I think of any like resources, I'll let you know, and
we'll put them in the description. And
right.
I know I'm kind of throwing in like questions, but I think I'm just curious, and I'm like,
no, that's
a good question. In here. We'll jump to the next one. We've got 4 mailbag questions today, so
nice.
And this is another kind of feeling hypersexualized, but for a different reason. Mailbag: feeling hypersexualized due to bisexuality. I'm a bisexual woman who does mostly date men. Not something I've explored at length, but I'm pretty open about it where it makes sense to be. I'm recently out of a relationship, and something I continue to come across is men overly interested in me also liking women. Once it comes up on a date, it seems like the only thing guys ask about, and the tone of the date immediately turns sexual. It feels like some think this is an in for a threesome type situation. What is the best way to communicate this in a way that keeps conversations from going down this path?
Yeah, I think that's very common. I know I have a lot of friends who are bisexual who have experienced that, and like I think it's kind of plays into the bigger picture of like women in general just being more sexualized than men a lot of the time. But yeah, I guess the first thing I thought of is like, I'm curious if this person is she choosing to bring this up herself, or maybe if she's on dating apps. I know sometimes people will put their sexuality on the dating app. I guess I'd be curious, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts too. But my opinion on like a first date is kind of like, kind of the point of the first date is just to like see like, do I want to go on another date? And you don't necessarily, I don't think you necessarily have to disclose everything about yourself on a first date. So I would say like if she's finding this come up a lot on first dates specifically, I don't know, like I wouldn't want to make it sound like I'm telling her to like hide that about herself. But I just think kind of similar to what we said earlier of like, you're not obligated to share anything with someone. So if you feel like you're repeatedly kind of feeling uncomfortable on a first date with like the way people are talking about your sexuality, I don't know. I would just kind of encourage her to be like, okay, maybe this is just something that I'm going to not bring up until like a second or third date, or even however many that she thinks would be good for her. Just because, yeah, I feel like on those first couple dates, you're kind of like weeding people out. And I think even if you don't directly talk about your sexuality, I feel like you kind of can get a vibe on someone of like, do they seem like they would be sexualizing me? And maybe not always, but I don't know. I guess that was one thought I had, was like maybe testing out like, okay, is this something that maybe I just don't touch on until I've gotten to know the person a little bit better and kind of feel like I trust that they are more open-minded or more educated even around like, what does bisexuality even mean? Like, it doesn't always mean that someone is wanting to have a threesome or date multiple partners or be hypersexual. Like it, you know, there's so many bisexual people who are very into like monogamy and just being with one person, and just because you're attracted to other genders doesn't mean that you like
with anybody. Or, and I totally like I've heard that from like just bisexual women feeling very like hypersexualized. The second it comes up, it's the only thing everyone ever talks about ever again. And I think like there's also just doing the song and dance of like trying to get ahead of something where you avoid getting hurt later, where it's like you'd rather know now that someone's not okay with it versus being, you know, several dates in, you're excited about them, and then this whole thing was a deal breaker the whole time. It's like that song and dance, but then it's also like, you know, I think there's also like, and I don't mean to go dark, but just acknowledging like the safety issue that can like come into play, and you know, around, you know, sharing just kind of like intimate like details and stuff like that. So it's like feeling like you're in a safe place, like maybe like understanding their values, you know, around, you know, kind of how they look at the world or how they look at human sexuality, you know, kind of in a broader standpoint. And maybe that's like a date 2 or 3 conversation. Is the way I saw it. But it's like a tough song and dance. Like, do you get ahead of something and just say, I want my cards on the table, and you know, you kind of run some risks there, or do you hold on to it and then run other risks later?
That's a good point, because I feel like for some people it almost is a good like weeding out process, because it's like, my other advice would be like, okay, if someone is going to react like that or over sexualize you, they're probably not the right person for you. So I can kind of see both sides, like you're saying, where it's like, okay, maybe it is better to sometimes put that on the table on the first date, and then and then you kind of see pretty quickly like, okay, this is probably not going to be a long-term relationship, because I really need someone who's going to be able to have more like nuanced conversations about sexuality, or who is more like open-minded, or not gonna make like this, because I don't know, I think of like bisexuality is obviously just like a part of someone's identity, so it's kind of like, I would imagine actually like at the beginning you mentioned like I'm sober, and I feel like it's similar for that, where a lot of people feel like if they're sober and dating, they feel like, oh, that's like all someone's gonna focus on, or they're gonna feel like some people don't even bring up that they're sober on a first date. They'll just say, oh, I just don't want to drink tonight, or whatever.
Order a mocktail.
And just
make it a thing,
So I feel like it's kind of similar, where it's like, that is an important part of you, but that's not all of you. Like, and I imagine that's how like bisexual women feel too. They're like, okay, obviously I want my partner to know about my sexuality and be like supportive of it, but it's not like, I guess like that's why I said it earlier, like on a first date, I feel like there's just other topics you could cover if you didn't feel comfortable talking about that part of you. So I don't know, I guess it is kind of like just deciding like what type of person you are, or what is most important to you, as far as like, do you want to really just be able to right off the bat be like, okay, no, this moving on, or do you want to kind of let's try to get to know someone and let them get to know you without that piece of information, and then kind of. But yeah, it is tough because I can.
And there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah,
like there's some people where it's like, this is what works for me. This is what tends to work with the type of circles I date in. What was I gonna ask? Have you heard anything about that app like Field or something like that? And this isn't a Field ad, but I've heard like it's a new app that's like actually taken off. Like I feel like a lot of new apps don't really like take off as much nowadays, like just because so much of a dating app's success, like no matter the user experience, is based on how many users there are. But I've heard it's a really good like open app for people who are open-minded in terms of sexuality and how that goes. So I've heard good things about Field is something I thought I would toss out there too.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like some people listening might want to check it out.
Yes,
I definitely want to look into it because I hadn't heard of that before.
Yeah, FEELD, and I think they're like Norway or something like that. But it's a very like not overly sexualized, like safe space to explore, and I think they kick out people that are trying to go in there for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
So I've heard really good things.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we need more good dating apps for people that are,
because it's like there's such a tough song and dance with that too, where it's like so much of a dating, you could have the best user experience in the world, but like you need users are part of the it can't be successful without other users on there, and it's tough because it's like everything's a double-edged sword. I feel like if you want to make things safer and make it more exclusive and stuff like that, like the challenge that comes with it is like you want it good quality, but like sometimes you need the quantity, and like it's tough. And then of course it's like at the end of the day, it's like are the Tinders and the match groups the necessary evil kind of thing. But I have one more question.
Okay. These are great questions. I'm enjoying them.
I'm having fun with them. A man into feet. I feel like this is a fun one to close it out. Okay. Been seeing a man for several weeks now, and we recently had a what turns you on conversation. In the process of this, he shared that he has an attraction to feet, a foot fetish. I like him, and everything we've done sexually, haven't explored the foot thing yet, but I can't really wrap my head around a foot fetish or why he would be attracted to my feet. He mentioned it being a big thing for him and something he absolutely noticed about me on the first date. He made no asks as far as wanting me to entertain the fetish specifically, and I'm not sure what all this means. I am now very aware that his eyes are on my feet, and it just feels weird to me. Everything I can find out about this online seems to be written in a jokey manner or for people that have the fetish themselves. There's so much out there about feet. Do you have any explanation on the foot thing? Do I have to participate in this fetish?
That's a good one. Well, I think like the last part of that question, I feel like you never have to participate in anything, obviously, that you don't feel comfortable with, and kind of what we talked about earlier, too, of like there are different ways to talk to someone about if you don't feel like you're interested in something that they might be interested in. But I think what was coming up for me when I was listening to that question was just the idea of like it is very normal for someone to talk about like being attracted to someone's butt or someone's boobs or like there's different parts of women's bodies where we're like used to them being sexualized almost. Like, if you're dating someone and they're like talking about how much they love your ass, you're probably not going to be like, oh, that's so weird, or like, oh no, now I know that he's looking at that part of my body. But I think that like with feet or with body parts that are not as, we don't think of them as sexual unless you already know that you have that fetish. I think a big part of it might just be like almost like the discomfort of like, oh, this feels new, or this feels like something I'm not used to. I think I don't like know a ton about foot fetishes, but I would imagine that there is kind of a spectrum almost of like, for some people it might be as simple as like they just think that feet are very beautiful and they like looking at them, just again the same way as someone would compliment like your hair or any other part of your body. So it could just be that. Like, I think obviously we don't know until, or she doesn't know until she would like ask him more. Like, what does like this mean for you? Or like, what are there sexual aspects of this? But that was kind of my first thought, was just like, obviously I always like encourage people to be open-minded and be like, okay, this might not be as foreign to me as I think it is. It's just maybe something that I've never thought of the idea of someone thinking my feet are sexy or beautiful or whatever. But yeah, like I said, like it does seem normal for us to think like, oh yeah, I know that he's, I don't know, like the stereotypical, like, are you a butt or a boobs guy? It's like, if a guy you're dating tells you he loves your boobs, you're also going to think like, oh yeah, now he's probably looking at my cleavage or he's looking at them. Anyway, I feel like that was part of what I heard her say was like, oh, now I know he's like looking at my feet in that way. And obviously if like genuinely makes you uncomfortable or you feel like if this is like an ick or a turn off for you, and that's, you can't control that obviously, but I guess just like thinking about it in that way could help.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because like, I feel like, because like my experience with like, and I don't and like it's something I won't understand, because it does feel like you never hear about people with hand fetishes or like nose fetishes or like any other body part that's like not a sexual organ. And like, and this is like, there was a man in my DMs, like I never entertained the idea, but he was in other women I knew's DMs and stuff like that, sending, and he was real, he lives in Austin, saying yeah, offering money to massage feet. Can I pay you money to massage your feet? And like, from what I have learned through the grapevine, and like it's something I won't understand, is like, you know, like putting feet pictures like on the, like if you're taking pictures or something, like, and you're barefoot in them, like they're like, it's something that, you know, it's definitely like a fetish that exists, and like people take notice to it. And like, yeah, there's obviously the jokey stuff too, where it's like, I'm gonna go sell my feet pictures. Like you never hear like, I'm gonna go sell my hand pictures. So it's like,
that's true. Yeah,
it's an interesting one that like and of course, like when you go and try to understand it, like, you know, what is it? Like you find just Feet Finder and like all of that stuff, and like, or stuff that's making fun of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it does kind of go back to what you said earlier about like, if someone is trying to research something, a lot of these topics, it's like, yeah, you're only gonna find either porn or like, like joking things or Reddit threads that are kind of not, you don't really even know who is talking in those threads or what, you know. So it is interesting to think about, like, maybe there are a lot of other things out, maybe there are people who have a hand fetish and we just don't know because they don't talk about it because they're like, that's weird, or I don't know. But you're right, there definitely is with
there's
feet,
something there.
There's something that's like, feet pictured, all that. I don't know too much about that, but you always hear people joking about it. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that is also something like, and as much as like I don't want to say like, I don't want to like be like, yeah, go to those subreddits and the Pornhubs and stuff like that, but something that you will learn very quickly if you make those searches is that there is a audience for everything. There is a butt for every seat. Like everyone who's like, oh, I have this weird thing about me, that's like, no, there's a subreddit dedicated to people like you. Yeah, that of people who want that. Like it seems like
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, like, trying to read about something on Reddit isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just you kind of have to like go into it knowing that, you know, this might not be 100% accurate, or this might not, or this is just some people's opinions, but that's like everything on the internet, I guess, because people search for stuff on TikTok too with like, that's how a lot of people find my videos, or they'll search like, could I be pregnant? Because I've made like some videos about like sex ed and stuff, and I've just seen people that will like find one of my older videos and I'm like, oh, they must have been like literally searching in TikTok, which is, so I don't know. It is interesting. It's like the internet is
it's a big place with a lot of information.
And
I'm glad they're going to you and not some other person out there, though.
That's true. That's kind of what I think. Yeah, I'm like, I mean, most people don't get any good sex ed or any so I guess I don't have any ill intent or anything, so I guess it's better to come to me than like some random person. But
totally. And I totally agree with you that, like, you know, there's the sexual education that's in the school systems, regardless of anyone's feelings about it. Like, I think people walk away from it with a lot more questions than answers. Like, if you're an adult who wants to, you know, kind of explore that, is there an adult version of free sex ed that you can look to, or what do you recommend if as kind of like for an adult who's maybe trying to explore more, try to like understand the things that maybe didn't make sense in their high school class?
Yeah, and that's very I feel like I don't know that I've ever talked to anyone who had good sex ed, like, or anyone who feels like their parents really had good conversations with them about it. I feel like most people, they're like, oh yeah, my parents just told me like don't get pregnant, and then that was the whole conversation. Or
Yeah,
like,
the
gave
sex
me
ed is
condoms.
don't do it.
Yeah.
It's either don't do it or here's your magazines and your condoms, and it's like I think both of those approaches aren't helpful.
Yeah,
I think
that's true. Yeah, there's a couple of podcasts I really like that I could recommend to people. Sex with Emily is one. She's been around for a while. She's like, and I can send you these links so you can add them. But she's a really good like sex educator and coach, and I feel like her podcasts are great because she covers a very wide array of different questions and things, and she's very knowledgeable. Sex with DB, Danielle, I'm forgetting her last name, but she has a good podcast too, and she does good content on Instagram and TikTok as well. And then there's a book that I like always recommend people. It's geared towards women, but it's called Come As You Are, and it's like very much like partially sex ed, but also kind of like it's very empowering for women. I think for a lot of, like we're saying, women who maybe didn't get taught this at a younger age, if they're wanting to kind of explore their sexuality or explore like, how could I be enjoying it more? How could I, or like, why do I have these different issues with my partner? Come As You Are is a great book where she just kind of goes over like some of the basics of like, I don't know, the fact that a lot of women have a more, I think what she calls like a reactive sex drive, where like we kind of need to be, we don't have as much like spontaneous is kind of what a lot of men have, where they will just kind of see you and be like, oh, she looks sexy, and then suddenly be like in the mood. A lot of women have more reactive, so it's like we need to kind of be turned on, have some foreplay, So anyway, this book kind of goes over all of that, which was, it was a book I read a couple years ago, and I was like, wow, this is very helpful to me. But yeah, I guess other than that, just like encouraging people to try to find and follow different creators on Instagram or TikTok that are talking about these topics. I think just like almost like normalizing it for yourself more, like the more you just kind of start to like consume content that's around these topics, the more it's like, oh yeah, this is actually not, doesn't need to be taboo, or doesn't need to be a I don't know, like secret, or like we all kind of deserve to be taught these things.
Totally.
So
No, that's a great recommendation. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
You've been such a huge help answering some of these questions that I don't know that any other guest could have helped me with. Shelly, I really appreciate it. You have a podcast too, and what's it called? Where can we find it?
Yeah, my podcast is called Situationship to Soulmate, and I started it last year. I've been, again, I have ADHD, so I have struggled with. I might ask you for some tips on like how to stay consistent, because I've struggled with staying consistent with my podcast, but I do have like over 10 episodes out now, and
I really appreciate having you on here today. Everyone, go follow Shelly on TikTok. Any parting words before we close out?
No, I just I appreciate you having me. It was really fun.
It was an honor.
Yeah, great questions, and I always appreciate people being willing to talk about these topics. So
it's hard to talk about, but necessary.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Shelly, I really appreciate it, and to everybody else, over and out. Bye.